Welcome. How's everybody doing? David here, doing all right here, broadcasting to y'all live from Austin, Texas. Hope you're doing well wherever you are at. Folks, sorry, a little bit of a delay here. We usually do these on Thursday, but happy to make sure that we're able to fit it in this week because we got a few things to talk about. For folks who are new, these Griscom streams are a little bit more informal than the main Left Reckoning, so feel free to jump in the chat with any kind of comments or questions or ideas that you have. We're happy to sort of make this more of a conversation than having it be one way. So feel free. Please do consider putting @Left Reckoning in the chat. If you do want to message me, it's a little bit easier for me to make sure I can see that over everything else. And before we dive into it, just a couple quick things. We got some really cool content coming up for y'all. We have an interview with Ben Fong, who has put together this incredible podcast for Jacobin Radio called Organize the Unorganized, and it's a history of the CIO, which made a huge mark, obviously, on American labor history, but particularly is a very interesting model to be looking at today in the American labor movement. Because if you want to look, as Ben says in the interview that we'll release later, at a time that's very familiar in American politics, where there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to organizing workers in this country. There's probably no better example to see how to get things moving than looking at the CIO. So that will be coming out very soon. We also had a great conversation with Bronco March on Nikki Haley. And I know she didn't really put together the most impressive campaign down in New Hampshire, up, I should say. But, I think she very much does represent a version of the Republican Party that there's a certain part of the ruling class that they'd like to see back. So we had Bronco on to talk a little bit about her history and what she represents. So really happy to do that. They'll all be out soon. You can get access to all those episodes at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. And one more thing before we dive into it, do not forget that we have our Left Reckoning merch, and we are still doing a sale where you can get free shipping on that Left Reckoning merch by going to leftreckoning.com/store and using the code RIDEON, RIDEON. And you get free shipping. We got a lot of good stuff over there. We have our Fence Cutter sweatshirt, Left Reckoning trucker cap, Plains t-shirt, and our Big Tex tank. You can get all those with free shipping if you use the code RIDEON. So jump on that because it's only going to be up. That code will only be viable for a few more days here. So definitely try to get on that. It really helps Matt and I continue to grow the show. And it's nice-ass merch. Matt and I have been enjoying wearing around town. I've been loving seeing the photos of people rocking them wherever they're at. Please send those and add us on Twitter and Instagram. We love to share those with everyone else. But all right, y'all, let's get to it. Obviously, we're probably going to be talking a little bit about Greg Abbott and this border fiasco. But I want to open up the channel here for folks who have questions or comments before we dive into that. And so I'm going to go through the chat, make sure I'm not missing anything here. Let's see, friends. All right, folks. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on here in Texas, and I'll open it up to the chat in just a little bit. But let's sort of set the stage because, there's been a lot of coverage of what's going on at the border. Sorry if I'm a little too close to the mic there. There's been a lot of coverage of what's going on at the border, particularly with Greg Abbott's challenge to the federal government. And, I want to walk a very clear line here because if you've been watching this program, or if you've been reading my work in places like Jacobin or Sublation magazine, you will have noticed a theme that I write about Greg Abbott a lot. Because Greg Abbott I find to be an extremely dangerous and effective Republican governor. He's a bad person, but he has a pretty decent understanding of how to do politics, and particularly where Greg Abbott has always thrived in his political career and in his legal career is operating in those kind of gray areas of the law. I won't rehash all of the things that I've written about in the past, but I do highly suggest that people go and read a piece that I wrote in Jacobin magazine back when Greg Abbott soundedly defeated Beto O'Rourke here in Texas. Because I really got into some of the ways that he's been using the office of the governor in using it in a way that is not really in line with the Texas state constitution. And he has been able to concentrate power in a way that is outside of the typical way that a governor runs this state. And how has he been able to do that? He's been able to do that by operating in what I would call the gray areas of the law. So, for example, Operation Lone Star, which is at the heart of all of this kind of border controversy that we're talking about right now. To get that started, to get the money to start Operation Lone Star, Greg Abbott was using federal COVID money. And how is federal COVID money being used to harass migrants at the Rio Grande? Well, it's because Greg Abbott issued a state emergency over COVID-19. Now, that's a little funny, isn't it? Because if you know anything about Texas and how Texas sort of handled the pandemic, you might remember that Texas was one of those early states to reopen, to not have, enforce social distancing, to sort of encourage children to go back to school, all that kind of stuff early on. So why did Texas maintain its COVID-19 disaster and emergency declaration? Well, because that provision gives Greg Abbott tremendous amounts of power, tremendous amounts of leeway to move money around, to issue proclamations, and to mobilize resources and forces. And he did that with the Texas National Guard. So Operation Lone Star has its origins in utilizing some of these kind of gray areas of the law, because the disaster declaration ability of the governor of Texas is really designed to make sure that if there's a hurricane or something like that in the state of Texas, that the governor can sort of get resources to people as they're needed, instead of having to wait for the legislature to push those through, right? Greg Abbott here is using this kind of thing that, technically is legal to call a disaster declaration and move money around and do these kind of things. But he's doing it not out of worry about, for example, COVID-19, because as we've already established, Texas was one of the first states to pull back any of the kind of regulations or protections for people. But he used COVID-19 happily to find a way to move money to the southern border to harass and terrorize immigrants in the Rio Grande. So anyways, this is one example out of many. And again, people read the piece. It's in Jacobin, Greg Abbott's Texas's most powerful governor ever. That's bad for working people, where I really look through his political career and break down some of these other examples. But I bring that up to let people know that the thing about Greg Abbott is that he has always sort of operated in these kind of murky waters. And he's somebody who understands politics enough to oftentimes be able to get away with it. Now, he's had the advantage in the state of Texas because the Democratic Party hasn't been able to put forward any serious challenge to him ever. And because of the domination of the state government by the Republican Party, he doesn't really have a lot of checks within the system. So now we're seeing him sort of operating on the national scale, using this kind of strategy that he has perfected and honed in the state of Texas. So to maybe speed things up a little bit for folks, and we could talk about the controversy, why everyone's talking about things like secession, civil war, and nullification, is that Greg Abbott has been putting in barbed wire into the Rio Grande. This has caused immense human suffering. As we know, there have been multiple examples of people drowning. There has been multiple injuries. And this is not something that is slowing or curtailing immigration. It is just terrorizing and harassing people who are entering into this country. Now, the irony, or I guess irony might be the wrong word here, the thing that I think we need to make really clear before we go further is that Joe Biden is not operating some kind of enlightened, angelic immigration program in this country. In fact, Joe Biden has made permanent many of Donald Trump's policies, and has made life very difficult for migrants. We have seen a significant upsurge of migrants in the past few years, but it's not because Joe Biden has become some kind of dove on the border. So what we're getting from people like Greg Abbott is, not really a strategy, for example, to maybe limit the amount of people who are coming into the country, but a way to use people as political pawns and spectacles, and to also harass and maim and in fact kill people who have come into this country, as we have multiple examples now of these kind of brutal deaths that people are experiencing because of these this barbed wire program of Greg Abbott. Now, so we've established basically that, Joe Biden is not some kind of dove on the border. And I just think it's really important to be clear about this. But the Republicans have sort of, understand it. In Texas, they understand this very well, that the border is just a winning issue for the Republican Party. It's a winning issue for the Republican Party, I think, nationally, but certainly in the state of Texas. And, they lean on this. So they've been sort of talking, Joe Biden's open border policies. So we've seen things like Operation Lone Star, which we were just talking about, and now this expansion of the barbed wire on the southern border. And from the very get-go of the Operation Lone Star, I had been calling on the federal government to get involved. Why? Because the United States Constitution is extremely clear that state governments do not have the right and the ability to be deciding immigration and border policy. That is a federal power. And if you start allowing governors like Greg Abbott to start operating and creating their own border policy parallel to the federal government, you are not only exposing people to the horrors and the difficulties and the maimings and the deaths that are coming from Greg Abbott's preferred policies, you are also opening up an incredibly dangerous can of worms when it comes to federal powers versus state power in the United States. Now, what Biden first did when Greg Abbott started putting barbed wire into the Rio Grande was challenge them. And how did they challenge them? They didn't challenge them directly. They didn't challenge them on the level of, hey, you're state government, you are a state governor, you do not have the ability to run parallel border policy to the United States government. No, they didn't do that. They challenged them saying, if you put any structure, and this is literally the argument, if you put any structure into navigable water in the United States of America, you have to first consult the Army Corps of Engineers. So a pretty weak response, in my opinion, to Greg Abbott's very blatant disregard and disrespect to the separation of powers in the United States and the authority of the federal government. Oh, no, we're not mad at you, Abbott, because you're trying to run parallel border operations. We're mad at you because you should have sent an email to the Army Corps of Engineers and you didn't send an email to them. Bullshit. So we've been getting these kind of narrow challenges from the Biden administration since Abbott has been getting into it. And I think that it's very clear that the Biden administration had made their early strategy was, hey, if we don't take this guy seriously, if we don't give him air, then maybe he will stop. Well, we're seeing that now is not the case. And what has happened in this past week that has everybody so alarmed and up in arms is that the Border Patrol has been struggling with the Texas National Guard because the Texas National Guard is not allowing the Border Patrol to operate normally and has been blocking access to certain areas, particularly in Eagle Pass around Shelby Park. There have been multiple instances where Texas National Guard have been refusing or blocking access to certain areas of the Border Patrol, and most notably, recently in January, the Border Patrol was trying to save a drowning woman. The Texas National Guard would not let them, and somebody drowned. Now, the Texas National Guard said this isn't the case, but this is a very clear conflict between the federal government and the state government. The Supreme Court ruled that the federal government has the right to cut down the barbed wire that the state is putting up. People thought this was it. Greg Abbott has responded by ordering the Texas National Guard to continue putting up barbed wire around and in the Rio Grande. Now, we want to be really clear here, and I want to be exceptionally clear here because I'm not trying to minimize or deny the very dangerous reality of what we are seeing. But this is another perfect example of how Greg Abbott operates. Because, yes, the Supreme Court said the federal government has the ability to cut down the barbed wire. And it looks like it's very clear that there's some members of the Texas National Guard who are still, sort of pushing back against Border Patrol and things like that when they're trying to engage in this activity. But the Supreme Court did not say that Texas cannot put out more barbed wire. And that's basically what Abbott is doing. So again, in this kind of gray area, it's very clear the intent of what the Supreme Court ruling was to sort of privilege and give authority to the federal government over the state government. But Abbott says, hey, the letter of the law, you said that they can cut it down, fine. You didn't say we couldn't do it anymore. So he's ordered the Texas National Guard to continue deploying this razor wire. And this is where we're getting the kind of headlines of Greg Abbott, denying the federal government or not following the Supreme Court ruling. And let me be very clear. This is not me defending Greg Abbott or saying what he's doing is right, or even saying what he's doing is legal. I don't think it is at all. But again, this is just going back to this is how Greg Abbott operates. He sees, oh, look, there's a kind of fuzzy part of the law here. It's not really, clear one way or the other, or I can make an argument in court if I need to, that this is how we interpreted the ruling from the Supreme Court, and that's why he is doing what he's doing. Now, of course, he's also mixing that up with statements like the letter that was released recently, where he's invoking the compact between the federal government and the states, which not only is laughable in the context of what he's talking about, but most people have been able to put together the kind of historic implications of talking about compact with the states, because this is the same kind of arguments that you were getting going into the Civil War about the compact between state governments and the federal government. Now, that legal theory has been debunked time and time again, and more importantly, it was debunked when the Union Army crushed the Confederacy. But Abbott is sort of mixing his kind of, I'm going to play around in the gray water of the law with these really bold statements. And it's showing a very clear example of what happens when you let guys like Greg Abbott fester and grow power. Because now Greg Abbott has this kind of perfect opportunity, because the Biden administration has avoided up until now a direct confrontation with Greg Abbott. Right? They have avoided that direct confrontation on the rights of the federal government over the states. Now Greg Abbott gets to have this kind of murky gray area where he gets to say, look, I'm standing up against the federal government, but also if I get in trouble, I'm just going to say, this was a kind of legal gray area that we were just sort of messing around with. So he gets a little bit of the best of both worlds, that he gets some sense of protection, right? Or justification down the line, and also gets to sit pretty in front of Donald Trump and the rest of the Republican governors in the United States and say, look, we're taking on the federal government today. It's an extremely, extremely dangerous game. And it's an extremely dangerous game to have somebody like Joe Biden sitting at the top when you have a very clear example of somebody subverting the role of the federal government. And again, I just want to be as clear as possible. The second that Greg Abbott started doing parallel border operations to the federal government, Joe Biden should have federalized the Texas National Guard. He should have federalized the Texas National Guard right away. And not only done it in the sense of, hey, look at what we're going to do. We're not going to allow states to sort of subvert the federal government, but also spoke true about what Greg Abbott's operation has meant for Texas National Guardsmen. Texas National Guardsmen have been deployed for a long-ass time at the border. Oftentimes, just getting into the nitty-gritty of it, these guys aren't getting paid very much for the work, because when the state government deploys you versus the national government deploys you, you get way less money. I know there's been some moves because it's been going on for so long, but early on, if people were dying in the line of duty, and people were dying, Texas National Guardsmen were dying, they weren't getting the same kind of death benefits that they would get if the federal government was calling them forward. So what I'm saying is that Biden not only could have said, "Hey, we're not going to let states subvert the federal government," and also, look, Greg Abbott is screwing over the Texas National Guardsmen. We're looking out for them. We're looking out for their bottom, for how they're getting paid, how they're getting treated, and been able to do that. But of course, Joe Biden would never be able to do something like that, because Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, are absolutely allergic to doing popular and public politics. And that's a very dangerous thing when you have a right wing that is very much I think, preparing itself and getting excited about the idea of having a much more significant conflict between the state government and the federal government, at least under Joe Biden. So, I mean, I'm sure there's more things that have been left unanswered, but that's just sort of my kind of quick recap and thoughts on what's going on. I will jump through the chat and see what people are saying about it, because I know there's some murky areas and maybe I missed some things that I had meant to say. So let's open up that conversation. But I just will, I guess, maybe as as part of the introduction, is just to sort of say that these are extremely dangerous times, and it's extremely worrying to think about the people who are in control being the ones who, being people like Joe Biden at a moment where you are seeing a very blatant opportunity, attempt from the governor of Texas to subvert federal authority. Actually, really quick before I open it up to questions and y'all's comments, I did just want to follow up with something that I had been joking about with Matt, because remember, all this stuff has been happening this week. Well, where has Greg Abbott been? During this whole time, when Greg Abbott has been releasing these very, sternly written letters and statements and things like that, he's been hanging out in India, at some conference in New Delhi, where he has been, sort of talking about American industry, and he's been posting, photographs of him hanging out with cricket players and Bollywood stars and all this kind of stuff. So, we could talk a lot about Modi and the far right in India and how it's also probably not a good symbolic thing for Greg Abbott to be doing what he's doing while he's, rubbing elbows, with people in a far right government. But it's also very fucking funny to think about, Greg Abbott sort of re-invoking some kind of Confederate imagery and things like that from a lobby of a Radisson hotel in New Delhi. So anyway, on that, let's get to some questions and comments from all of y'all. And we do appreciate super chats very much, but I try to get to all of them, or as many as I can. Please do at Left Reckoning or at David if you can in your chat, so I can make sure that I can see it. I'll take a few of these and see what's going on. All right, friends, let's see. Okay. Rose asked a question, and I will say that I'm not a constitutional lawyer or anything like that, so this is just my understanding. But can the federal government take Abbott to court for violating its right to cut the barbed wire? I mean, I'm sure that they could. Again, to be very clear, what Abbott is doing is he's just redeploying more barbed wire. Which again, it's like childish stuff, but high stakes. But yeah, I mean, 100. If Greg Abbott if the Texas National Guard was actually like physically blocking Border Patrol agents, I think, from cutting the barbed wire, I think there's an easy court case to bring. And this is a point too. Colonial, apologies if I said your name wrong. I'm sure I did. But Abbott can't claim an invasion, but Biden won't do anything about it. And that's something that I did fail to mention. Greg Abbott has been claiming that there's an invasion of the state of Texas going on, which, apart from the disgusting rhetoric, let's be very clear about what, that clause is about. Now, that clause is not about, I don't like the amount of immigration that I'm seeing in the United States. That's like, we are being invaded by a foreign army and it's 1820 and it takes 3 weeks for us to send a letter to Washington, D.C. so that we have the ability to muster up an army and defend ourselves. That's what the invasion clause is about. It's an old school kind of thing to sit here and be like, actually, the Constitution protects the right of Texas to put barbed wire in the fucking Rio Grande. Get the hell out of here with that bullshit. No doubt about that, too. Chip Roy, Baltimore's favorite son, a Republican congressperson from Austin and a wide swath of Texas, because we have insane gerrymandered districts here. Chip Roy is fanning the flames, too, big time. All right, let's see. And also, Joe Biden kind of in retaliation here. And again, this is like the kind of secondary fight that we're getting. Biden blocked a natural gas pipeline, a liquefied natural gas pipeline. People are saying that's retaliation. That's sort of what we're getting here. Des Eagle says, "Hey Dave, do you think there's any meat to the other governors pledging to send their own guard?" I mean, I think that there is meat to it in the sense that, like, yeah, that's what it seems like they're attempting to do. I think this is a really great kind of political symbolic opportunity for right-wing Republican governors, and I think all the Republican governors have said that they support what Greg Abbott is doing, except for the governor of Vermont, and that is that could have changed by the time we went live. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, this is a good opportunity if you're a Republican governor to show up your bona fides and fight in the federal government and Joe Biden, and they'll send people down to Eagle Pass to harass folks in order to do that. So yeah. Josh says, what do you think of Civil War? I don't like talking about those kind of things because I think, speaking about those things earlier or making those things seem real is a kind of dangerous thought exercise, frankly. Alex says, what's the popular take in Texas on the issue? Do they want their National Guard also controlled by the state? I'm assuming by the state, you mean by the state of Texas. Abbott is a very popular governor in the state of Texas. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for a different kind of politics in the state. But the border has just been a winning issue for Republicans in Texas for a long while. And it's something that's, popular across a large group of people, even beyond maybe the groups of folks you might think, kind of white conservatives. There's a lot of people who will say things like, oh, well, yeah, I think, Abbott's strong on the border and we like that, even if I disagree with him on this or that. And what Abbott is doing right now is inhumane. It's monstrous. But, look at any kind of political climber in this country and look how they talk about the border. So Colin Allred, who is trying to become the Democratic nominee for Senate from Texas, wrote a letter and signed on to a letter written by the Republican Party saying that, he opposes Joe Biden's open border policies, right? And that's a Democrat trying to run for Senate in Texas, not even being able to sort of distinguish himself from somebody like, let's say, Ted Cruz. So political climbers love to sort of talk tough on the border. I mean, somebody like RFK. RFK has said all sorts of monstrous stuff on the border. And that strange little guy, what's his name, from Minnesota, Dean Phillips, who's running for president of the Democratic primary, he was tweeting out about how, he opposes Joe Biden's open border policies and wants to, restore a hard border. It is just it is something that if you don't give a shit about what happens to people, it can just be such a winner for you to start talking tough on the border. And it's true in Texas, and it's becoming true across the country. I think the left has to be very serious about pushing back against that kind of stuff. But the consequences of this are massive. So I don't mean to trivialize it by saying that it's just like an easy position for politicians to sort of pursue and say, oh, we're going to be tough on the border. And frankly, people don't give a shit about what being tough on the border is, when it comes to the human cost of it, unless they're really exposed to the reality of it. Right now, there's plenty of people in the state of Texas who are furious about what Greg Abbott is doing. But I don't know if you could say that it's one way or the other in the sense of like a majority of people are furious at it. If you look at the opinion pollings, a lot of people have been liking what he's been doing. It's not 100% or anything like that. It's mixed in the sense of like Texas is a state where there's of varied political opinions. So it's hard to say what's the popular take on Texas. And you walk around Austin, people aren't going to be too happy about it. Maybe that helps. Who do you think they'd shoehorn in if both Biden and Trump croaked? I mean, I think the funniest thing would be Kamala for Biden. And I think it'd be a very funny thing to watch some people freak out if they even tried to deny her that position in the Democratic Party. And for Trump, I mean, it would be Haley, right? I think that that's her insurance package in continuing to run against Trump right now. And we didn't even get into this today, and I'm sure we'll have more time to cover it later. But Christy says, I watched the ICJ decision this morning. I was pleasantly surprised, not thrilled, but pleasantly surprised. No, I mean, look, these international justice institutions, don't have the best record of, achieving all that they want. But I mean, you have to chalk this up as a victory to some extent, at least. And I think that the fact that the New York Times, for example, was trying to bury the lead about what the ICJ found, sort of shows that, hey, there was some meat there. Jamie says, can you talk about the letter written by other GOP governors in their support of Abbott? I think that, when you look at the way that the Republican Party is sort of organizing around this question, I think that they're seeing this as like a very, very viable lightning rod for the Republican Party to continue to shore up support on one of their most popular talking points and issues, which is immigration and the border. That is something that they are just committed to beaming into their voters' heads 24/7. And, having a big kind of spectacular stands in Eagle Pass, showing some guys with some, big guns, frightening photos of, blurred people coming over the border. They just know that this is something that is just red meat to their base. And not only being able to have those images, but actually this idea of like a united Republican front taking on the weak, corrupt, and powerless federal government. It's a complete win, not just in the, like, if you even think of it, just because of the way that the government's set up right now, since Joe Biden's the president, 100% of the Republicans have always sort of been, states' rights over federal rights. But this also gets to work, on two sides, right? Because you get to have that conversation about states' rights and, states coming together and all that bullshit. And also the federal government right now is the Democratic Party. And you have a kind of weak leader who was watching like the very fabric of the country. And again, I don't want to speak too alarmist here, and I think that it's important to recognize the danger that we're seeing, but also sort of recognize, Greg Abbott is in India right now trying to, get some businesses to come to Lubbock, Texas, right? So again, I'm not trying to downplay it or say it's not serious. We've dedicated this whole episode to talking about it, but just recognize that they're just racking up wins politically because Biden didn't have the spine early enough to start standing up about this until it got to a point right now where we're having like the Supreme Court getting involved about whether or not the Texas National Guard can stop the federal government from doing its own operations with the Border Patrol, right? Talking about the support and the kind of framing that we've been getting from the Republicans, from the letter that was, basically talking about the compact of the states to the federal government, which again, that's like Confederate language. This is just something that is a huge, I think, political win for them. And it's Biden made a decision, I think, early on. It's like, hey, if we don't confront Greg Abbott and we just let him do his thing and, do his press, give his speeches. And, when Biden came to Texas, Greg Abbott wheeled over to him at the plane and like handed him a letter, didn't even have like the balls to, say it to his face, but handed him a little letter where he said, I think you're failing at the border. I think the Biden administration was like, oh, we'll just let him have his like sideshow for voters in Texas, and not realizing that eventually this was going to get to this point where now it's not just, a Texas Republican thing. It's a kind of national Republican thing. Donald Trump is, out here saying stand with Texas. You have this really nasty, meme going around. I'm sure y'all have probably seen it. Ted Cruz, has been posting it to kind of come and take it from the Texas Revolution. But instead of a cannon, it is barbed wire, which, regardless of what you think about the accuracy of the story of the Texas Revolution, just like, let's just operate from somebody who's a believer in that, replacing a fight for liberty with the ability to terrorize migrants at the border is a pretty depressing flip here. I'm just trying to see if I can pull it up for y'all, because I know Cruz has been posting it and a bunch of other people have been posting it. It doesn't matter. You know what it is. And as people know, have been reading and watching me for years, I've written about barbed wire historically in the state of Texas with the fence cutters, which was one of the first, which was a really interesting kind of radical movement of white and black cowboys in the state of Texas, cutting down barbed wire that was being put up by the rich and powerful, to prevent people from having access to the land. I'll tell you, it'd be really nice if we spent a little bit of time reenacting the vision of the fence cutters today. But it is just sort of, not to be too much of a philosophy major. There is something that is a little bit of interesting today to sit here and see that barbed wire is becoming another issue in the state of Texas like it was in the 1800s. Anyways, thank you for the question there. All right, let's see. If there's any more questions or anything like that. Looney Tunes, I have not been following Trump's cases, I will admit, but Looney Tunes says, did you see that Trump had to pay E. Jean Carroll $83.3 million? Looks like Donnie's going to go broke. I haven't been keeping up with Trump's trials, I will admit. But, take whatever you want from him. I don't give a shit. All right, folks. I think unless anyone else has any more questions or comments, I'll give you all just a moment to throw those in there. We might be rolling for the rest of the week. We have some. We're going to talk a little bit more about, I think, the UAW on Tuesday. Probably a little bit more on the ICJ. We'll watch what happens. If anything, more that is needed to be updated on the border in Abbott, for the Tuesday show. But we'll be back on Sunday with a bonus episode for our patrons. You get access at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Just a quick plug here. Nobody even asked me to do this. This is just something that I think is important and is worth checking out. If you guys haven't had a chance to want to read Damage Magazine online, you definitely should. A lot of our good friends have been writing their really great pieces. But their print issues are out now. And this first print issue number 1, is really, really great. It's a very serious and sober, and at times difficult in the sense of, sort of realizing where we are, kind of, investigation about where the left is in this country, where we need to sort of like establish and recommit to our radical and mass politics, commitments. But there's really great pieces in here from Dustin Guastella about why manufacturing workers are important. Amber Frost has a really great piece at the beginning of the magazine. Benjamin Fong, who's going to be on the program soon, talking about the CIO, has a great piece in this. Matt Huber, Fred Stafford. I mean, I could just read out all the names on here because it's a great piece. So people should check that out. Damage Magazine. In their first print issue, which just come out. It's really great. But folks, all right. Okay, I guess there's a couple more. I will look at those really fast. you guys are going to cover the increasing Hindu nationalism in India, especially with that temple built on the site of a destroyed mosque. Would be happy to do more on Modi and the far right in India. We had done a little bit in the past. If anyone has a good guest on that, I'd be very happy to speak with them. Let us know. Spend me the sale clause says, when do we get our fully automated luxury communism? It's like, well, it looks like it's a ways away. Sad thing is a lot of people on the left that sort of turn their back on ideas like that. It's the fully austere communism seems to be a calling card for a lot of people on the left. So we got to fight to get hope for a better future back into people's hearts because, man, the issues I had with Bastani's book, and I say this, speaking as like a comrade, man, I almost take all those back, realizing that a few years later we'd go from fully automated luxury communism to like Americans shouldn't eat food anymore, kind of left-wing bullshit that we're seeing now. Do miss that. Prairie Fire says, I missed the first 2/3 of the show. Did you put in your picks for the 2 championship games this weekend? I'm thinking Chiefs and Lions for the Super Bowl. I think it's going to be, look, I mean, what I would like for the Super Bowl would be for it to be the Ravens versus the Lions. I think that's the most fun storyline. I think that the Ravens are going to beat the Chiefs this weekend. The Lions 49ers is a little harder for me to pick. I would prefer, to be Ravens Lions in the Super Bowl, but I think it's going to be Ravens 49ers. But we'll see this weekend. Looking forward to that. All right, folks. I'm going to run. I hope y'all have a great weekend. We'll be back this Sunday with a bonus episode, patreon.com/leftreckoning to get that. It really does help us continue to do the show. Supports myself, supports Matt. Don't forget, we are doing for the next few days a sale on our merch. You can get access to that, leftreckoning.com/store. And if you use the code RIDEON, you will get free shipping on our Fence Cutter sweatshirt, the Trucker Cap, Plains t-shirt, and the Big Tex tank. So please consider doing that. It really does help us continue to grow the show and move on. Everyone, hope you have a good weekend. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see y'all soon. See you Sunday, patrons.